the quickest way to pull somebody out of alignment with the truth of their soul is trying to be very dead set or aimed on a preference or an outcome. Men are very conditioned to be only viewed as valuable as what we produce. And that's very much a "what have you done for me lately" trap that we are conditioned into. If I could just achieve this, then I could afford to relax more. That's a construct we're making up for ourselves that prevents us from relaxing now, from being present now. Like Gandhi saying, "Be the change you wish to see in the world." He didn't say, find the people that are behaving in a way that seems dumb and go conquer them or appeal to them or reason with them. He just said, be the change.
All right, welcome to the Evolving Potential Podcast. This is episode number 15. Today I've got on the show Cleburn Walker. Cleburn Walker served in the Marines before moving into MMA fighting and even getting a shot on season 11 of The Ultimate Fighter. He has extensive experience in selling cars and real estate. He's also the father of 5 children, and more recently the author of a book called Ascension, Knowing God in You, which he skillfully narrates in Audible, by the way. He now creates content, does podcasts, and speaks about life's greatest mysteries, searches for the common threads between esoteric teachings, philosophy, religion, science, and mindfulness, and also assists others as an alignment and integration guide. I personally discovered his work through Nick Zai's podcast, The Human Game, where they talked about ending the war within ourselves, and I knew I just had to get him on the show. So, welcome, Cleburn. I'm happy to have you, man.
Hey, thank you, brother, for inviting me.
Absolutely. So I want to first discover kind of who you are, your journey, and how you got into all this. So I figured instead of maybe going back to military and MMA, we can start with how you've transitioned from car and real estate sales into this alignment and integration guide. So we can talk about what motivated this shift and how you might define alignment and integration in the context of this new role.
I would say for the past couple of years, life and spirit has been moving me at its discretion, not mine. You know what I mean? So I had gotten pretty good at the whole provider role as a dad, and I had kind of figured out the mechanics of how to play the money game. And right when I was hitting my stride and I was like, okay, now this is really easy. Then it was like, God was like, no, you don't get to do that anymore. So through a very complicated series of personal shifts and life changes and all that kind of stuff, it sort of wedged me into this spot where I'm at now. So it could be no other way. And I tried to do it other ways. I tried to continue to exist in the normal marketplace. I tried to continue existing and maintaining the lifestyle and the rhythm that myself and my kids had gotten used to and all that kind of stuff. And this effectively is a byproduct of my sincere invitation to invite the truth, to invite God to reveal the truth to me, whatever that may bring. And this is, since you mentioned, I do work with people one-on-one, that tends to be a big one, that a lot of times almost everything we do is based on a programming or a subconscious impulsive repetition of programming that we're unaware of. But as we strip that away and move more back into our true authentic self and the truth of who we are in alignment with God, as a byproduct, since our external world is always like a sort of a holographic reflection of our internal state, as we move more into truth, anything in our external world that is built on not truth or compromise or unknowing, that stuff will shift and fall away because the external world has to match your internal world. So that's probably a really long-winded way of saying I don't know how to answer your question.
No, it's good though. I want it to be long-winded, and I want it to be as deep as it needs to go.
Yeah.
So, I mean, how would you say though that you began that process of stripping away that programming? I mean, was it just intuitive? Was it just insights and downloads and messages, or was it like a process that you were kind of taking yourself through?
Yeah, it was intuitive. It was the willingness to receive the downloads that were coming through, which a lot of people probably start getting those whispers, those invitations to be initiated further into their spiritual development, because we all are on the same path of spiritual evolution and our path back home to source, but we all go at our own pace and through our own curriculum. But I eventually got to a point where had like, even when you grow up in like a religious atmosphere and you look at people and you're like, okay, so everybody's kind of going through the motions and they're saying they believe these things and they're saying that these are their highest ideals. But if they really believed it, like, why are we not all collectively living significantly differently than we do, right? So it's like this a very shallow surface level security blanket of pretend faith and pretend alignment that we use to get us through our day and allow us to continue existing in ignorance. But yeah, it was really just an unwillingness to pretend anymore and an unwillingness to perform. So it was an invitation to let the truth of spirit reveal itself to me and accepting the progression of that.
And so did you grow up religious? Did you have to kind of get through that programming and let that stuff go to find this intuition and to be, I guess, able to accept these downloads?
I mean, yeah, I'm like a Texas boy, right? So I'm in the Bible Belt, and you in Arizona may have had some of that as well. But like, and I grew up like in the pre-internet era, right? Like I was alive and well and cognizant in the 80s and 90s and stuff like that. So where you were was where you were. There wasn't this like mass interconnectedness that we kind of have through the internet and social media and stuff. So the world in which I grew up in was very small town, Southern Christian, all that kind of stuff. But from my earliest memories of being self-aware, like age 4, it was always to question these things and want to know more and want to know the truth, but not able yet to stand fully or to like claim the sovereignty of what I feel and know to be true all the time. I was always at least willing to compromise and defer to the societal expectations, to what appeared to be going on by everybody else around me. So yeah, I grew up in a religious themed environment, which maybe we all do, right? Like maybe everybody has some sort of spiritual theme in their starting point, whether it's they grew up with some like hippie parents in a commune, whether they grew up like where like Buddhism is the culture of their area, whether they grew up with like what atheists with it, which is still, a spiritual theme. Like everybody has some sort of spiritual framework that is like the starting point for their life, I think.
Yeah, I can agree with that. So how would you describe what you're doing now as an alignment and integration guide? What does that mean to you?
So that is the only thing I really suck at making a bio for myself. So I appreciate you sort of compiling a quick little resume, but like my Instagram bio, like I don't know what else to say other than human at peace. That's about the only way I would know how to explain myself in a way that someone might get it. But alignment and integration, that's effectively the people who have reached the point where they're asking the questions that they can no longer do. Like they can't put it on pause anymore, right? Like those questions that are nuanced and they want to know the answers. It's effectively showing them how to unlock what's inside them and how to direct themselves back to the kingdom of heaven that's within them. And it's effectively placing their hand knowingly in the hand of God, of the universe. So it's helping people come to peace and feel relaxed about this process that is set up to feel very scary and very potentially blasphemous or very potentially life altering in a way that can be uncomfortable. And there's so much misinformation, and especially in the in the church communities or the spiritual communities, there are tons of people that get close enough to accessing truth, and then they leverage it for their own personal gain. So most of this like pursuit of spiritual development leaves a lot of people kind of jaded. Like they run into people that are almost just trying to poach on their desire to learn or their desire to grow. So that is the way in which I am able to show up and serve at this time, I guess.
And so if you were to feel like everything's nice and aligned for you, or you were able to help a client or a friend to achieve alignment, how would you describe that process, I guess? How would you describe being aligned?
Well, I mean, there's no finish line, I guess you could say. There's always like, I mean, you could look at like, what did Jesus do, right? Like he did a bunch of stuff, died on the cross. That wasn't the finish line. He rose again. Then he spent 40 days like as sort of a ghost, like still present with people. And then anyway, so there's no like finish line in the way people would look at it in a linear sense. But how does that work when I'm working with people? Well, we could do some of that now if you want. Like if you have any questions, things that are coming through for you, things you're working on, and we could like chat through that. And effectively what I do is I get out of the way and then just show up as like a channel for whatever you need to come through to help it just sort of find that little aha calibration. Because if you were to think about two ships that started in the same harbor and they were headed to the same destination, but one of them, their compass was like off a little bit. It was 1 degree off. So they're heading in the same direction. And for a long time, it looks like they're on the same track, but given a long enough timeline, one of them is going to wind up way off course. And one of them is going to wind up where it thought it was aiming. So that's effectively what it is. When people start to perceive their own misalignment, like that, they're like, I think I'm heading in the right direction and I think I'm doing the right things, but something's just not clicking. Something's off. And there's always some gentle, simple, easy way to shift that calibration, to realign that compass, that spiritual compass, in a way that involves a lot less steps, a lot less stuff, and a lot less like things added to it, right? So there's, once people are tying their livelihood to a thing, then they feel a constant need to remain relevant, to continue developing new things, and to try to find something that is the new like answer or whatever. When in reality, when it comes to like spirituality, to knowing thyself, and connecting to God, it's the opposite of doing things. It's the opposite of like looking for divination tools. It's the opposite of like all these journeys that we kind of feel a need to go on. It's really about pausing all of that and decoding all of that back to sitting in the presence of the I am. Now, sometimes that takes a little bit of guiding, a little bit of like how to let go of stuff that is unnecessary or is programming or is serving as like a crutch. But that's mostly what it's about. It's how to simplify the process of remembering that there is nothing to add. There may be things to remove, but it's getting back to the truth of who you are prior to all of these costumes that we've put on and begin to identify as ourselves.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean by that. And I think we all kind of struggle with that. And that's going to be part of this questioning process as well, is like, how do you balance and align, I guess, the, desire to grow and improve and to achieve with the contentment and presence, and through like things like flow state, I feel like I've found a sort of breadcrumbs of like, okay, if I can tap into my joy, my strengths, my passion, ultimately that will lead me down the path of my greatest career and the greatest service to the world. But, regularly getting caught between, okay, like, is it this, is it that, is it sports psychology? Is it becoming a consultant? Is it, and being very caught up in things that aren't necessarily in alignment with how I got here in the
Yeah.
first place, coming
Yeah.
down the road of spirituality, you know?
Yeah. So this is like one of the main things that comes up with people that reach out to work with me. They're looking for how to find their purpose, which is tethered to what do I do in the world, which is entirely survival based. It's entirely flesh based, right? Like I need to be relevant. I need to find a partner. I need to make an income by a livelihood. Some of that can be with high intentions, right? How can I be of service to people, but in a way that repays me, right? Like reciprocates to me. And it's always geared towards like the culture we live in. This is actually a big one we'll get into right now, but the culture we live into paints this picture that we are supposed to be, right? Like in the pursuit of happiness. It's in our founding documents as a nation. We are supposed to be like, we have truly become a nature of consumers. Consumerism has consumed the spirit of this country. So there's this always like feeling of that there's something next, something I have to get, something I need to look for. I'm in junior high so I can get to high school, so I can get to college, so I can get a job, so I can get a house, so I can retire one day, right? Like there's always this next step, right? Like all these kinds of things. I've got an iPhone, but next year when they come out with a new one, I've got to get the next one, right? Like I've got a car, but I've had it for 3 years. It's still running, but it's got like an older version of the thing. So there's this constant consumerism thing. Even our holidays, Christmas is what you would think is such a big deal for spiritual reasons, for like moral reasons. But what is it really about? It's about decorations and presents and just having a big event that involves a lot of spending and a lot of thinking we need to go do some shit to get some shit that we didn't have 5 minutes ago. And it's not going to alter our life. So that's a big part of the conditioning that people are operating from when they start trying to think about how to design a purpose, right? They're thinking, what can I do? And then they look at it from a moral lens. They apply this filter of morality. So they have these boxes to check. Okay, what can I do that makes me feel like I'm of service, that's within my moral boundaries, that is a skill that I have, but most importantly, I enjoy it. It follows my passions. It makes me money, and it's something I can grow a business out of, right? Like how can I make all of these things that check my moral boxes, but ultimately serve me the best? When in reality, we are here to master energies and emotions and things like that. The construct of our reality, the energy construct of light and sound waves in vibration that ultimately crystallize into what we perceive as the physical reality. We're here to master that. And happiness and joy are just certain hues on that spectrum. But we also have to be willing to embrace disappointment, fear, like all the shit that we're constantly not told to like accept. I'm not saying to embrace it or to be like a sadist here and all that kind of stuff. But there are so many people spend so much time chasing this preferred ideal finish line that they're fragmented. And this is 100% the voice of the ego. As soon as somebody starts getting very concerned about the outcome, that is the voice of the ego that wants to know what's going to happen. How's it going to happen? I'm not sure if I'm going to be in agreement with this unless I know what I'm going to get from it, right? That is 100% the ego. So the call of spirit is always an invitation to stop that, to shut the fuck up, to be right here, right now, and let go of the past and the future, because you're never in the past or the future. You're always right where you're at, right? And this may sound like almost dumb or like simple, but to like really sit in the truth of that, like I am always right in the present moment of my conscious awareness of myself. I can think about things that I have experienced with regret or with nostalgia or with fondness. I can think about things that I might like to experience and like to aim myself towards, orientate myself towards these potential futures. And you can say, hey, I'd like to have a crop of corn this harvest season, right? So you till the land and you plant the seeds. But what happens between those seeds and you harvesting corn, that's between the seeds and God, right? So like we can't make the seed bloom, you know what I mean? Like we don't, that's like out of our hands from the level of the human experience. So too many people's ego wants to get overly involved in all these things that can't be handled by us. So it's spirit constantly inviting us to sit still right where we're at and rest in that. And then when that can happen, that starts to feel like why Jesus would say, my yoke is easy and my burden is light, because from there, everything that happens isn't you with your limited human intellect trying to come up with what you think you want or what you think you should do. Because I mean, if anybody's like me in this regard, which most people I've talked to have been, you have achieved some goals before. And although it feels great, it never quite feels like what you thought, right? Like you thought you were heading towards a certain level of satisfaction or a certain level of fulfillment. And then you get there, like you're not done. You got to keep going. So then you just have to think of a next thing and a next thing. So the practice of learning to settle into right now frees tomorrow up for God to handle it, because it's already handled by God anyways, so that we can have this experience of surprise and uncertainty. And spirit is a constant invitation to accept the fear of the unknown and stop being afraid of it and start viewing it as like a treat, like a surprise, like a gift to have something that we don't know, versus the utter boredom of if you were in that like highest consciousness state where you have been back and forth through every perceivable timeline and you knew every possible nuance and variation. Just like a movie, if you've seen it 100 times, it's not quite the same as the first time you watch it, and you didn't catch any of the surprise plot twists that were in there. So it's sort of like that.
That's crazy. So how would you say that you are able to silence the voice of the ego and begin to listen to the spirit? And I think that along with that becomes, to a lot of people, listening to the voice of the spirit and being present in the moment sounds like doing nothing. Sounds like sitting around and not accomplishing goals. You know what I mean? And so
Right.
Obviously there has to be some sort of a balance in there, because we do have to pay our bills and we do have to get things done.
It's the total opposite of doing nothing. It's just like all the, spiritualists that say the height of spirituality is when you go back to chopping your wood and carrying your water. You know what I mean? It's like, I'm not trying to avoid any amount of work or what it's truly just a matter of releasing outcome, like the outcome, letting go of all the what ifs. I saw a really simple but very potent meme the other day. It said, fear asks what if, and faith says even if. So a lot of times once we start constructing an end goal in our mind, then all these things start popping up, like, okay, well, what happens if this doesn't happen? Or your sense of identity can be tethered to it. Like, well, if I really wanted it and really worked for it and really gave it my all and it didn't happen, then what does that say about me? So, to some unspoken subconscious level, this prevents some people from even starting. The fear of, what if I fail? Well, that would suck, so I don't start. Or, they would have like a pendulum swing in the opposite direction. Like, I put all my faith in this result. I was praying to God. I was doing these right things. I stuck to my diet and I didn't get what I wanted. So then they like revolt. They turn in the other direction, because it's still the ego effectively trying to barter with the universe and say, okay, I'm going to play along with what I think will get me what I want. But when I don't get what I want, then what? So the desire for a specific outcome, especially coming from a place of ego, puts people by default into a space of performance and compromise and manipulation, and being willing to like stay headed in the direction of what they think will get that result. So it's the quickest way to pull somebody out of alignment with the truth of their soul is trying to be very dead set or aimed on a preference or an outcome. So it's not about being lazy or doing nothing. It's the opposite. It's being totally willing to do what is flowing through you, what is coming up that's the truth of what to do. So maybe if this is in regards to like you yourself, like thinking of how best to put myself to work in a way where I can be productive, make money, provide for my family, do all that kind of stuff, be of service, also be an avenue of self-discovery and self-expansion through which I can like know myself better. None of that is wrong, and everything has a certain time and place for a person's level of development. But at some point, it becomes the aim of spirit to ask you to stop planning. Like spirit's going to give you the work to do when it's time. Like you'll sense an alignment with what you like think you want to do, but how you do it and what comes from it, you kind of have to give that to God.
Yeah, see, and that's a tough one for me. And as a coach, as a person who used to be a nutrition coach and bodybuilding coach and fitness coach and things like that, I have found that I started having a lot of success with people when I was helping them to achieve some sort of purpose or meaning behind why they were doing their diet, why they were doing their workout program.
Yeah.
And for me, I've like really latched onto that for quite a while until more recently about how powerful that is. And so I guess I've been almost jaded lately trying to discover, okay, yes, these having this larger vision that I'm working towards can be incredibly motivating. But at the same time, it can be incredibly limiting and incredibly stressful, and so trying to find, because I've always wanted to give that to people. I always want like, hey, let's come up with some larger vision for you. And, what do you see for yourself? And then creating this picture and then working towards that is incredibly motivating. It helps people to wake up in the morning and have something that they're trying to accomplish.
Yeah.
But then the more that I do that over the years, it's just the more that spirit, if you will, starts to tell me that that's not it.
Yeah. So for them is irrelevant, right? Like, and this used to be a big part. Like it's in my book at a certain point for a certain reason, because the book is like a chronological series of steps of progression building towards an ability to tap into spirit in a certain way, but a series of integrations and meditations and intentions. But I used to be a big fan of being very on purpose, being very goal driven, being very much in pursuit. I really latched on to quotes like, set a goal so big that in the process of achieving it, you become someone worth becoming, right? Or if you aim for the moon and even if you miss, you'll land among the stars, like all that kind of stuff, right? Like just like 10X, right? Like all that stuff, just like set a goal so big and like really bust my ass to get in that direction. But even if I fail, I've still done a lot more than if I wasn't aiming anywhere, right? That is a tried and true thought process at a certain level of consciousness. And it's designed to get somebody from a lower level of consciousness to the next one. So as you yourself have outgrown that level of development, that curriculum level, it doesn't so much matter about the individuals that you come in contact to, if that's particularly where they're at or not. It's not resonating with you because you're beyond that. So the people you're interacting with, who are always just a mirror reflection of your true inner state, are no longer like reciprocating the, aha, I totally dig that and that's really working for me, like maybe they used to, because you yourself are in a different place. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, it definitely does. Does. And so as you become aware of the ego and also the shadow is something I definitely want to talk about. I loved the part of your book where you talked about integrating the shadow. And so, how do you gain an awareness around that and start to move up that level, start to integrate some of those things, start to separate what you are from what you are not, what is spirit versus what is ego?
So this is why it takes some practice, but it eventually becomes extremely simple to unwind everything back to simply being I am, simply being self-aware consciousness as I am, right? Like the story of Moses asking God, like, what's your name? And he's like, I am that I am. Like you come up with a name if you want. All that stuff is a costume. It's just an outfit that you're going to put on me. So the simplicity of saying I am is what I am. That's who and what I am. That is forever, and it is immutable. Beyond that, every other thing beyond I am is it's God holding up a mirror to reflect back to itself so it can see what it looks like. So every other thing I attach to I am, how do I describe myself? How do I evaluate myself? How do I perceive myself? Is always in relation to something else, right? Like I can't have a description of myself without something to compare it to, without something to bounce it off of. If nothing existed except just you being aware in a space of infinite nothingness, like how could you compare yourself to anything else? Unless you could say, well, I'm white because there's black over there. I'm wet because there's dry over there. So you can't have a description of yourself without there existing something that's not in that same spot along the line of polarity for that concept. So being willing to spend more time sitting in the space of I am and looking at all of these constructs that have given me a framework through which to experience myself allows me to say, okay, I'm not afraid because I'm not fear. Fear is a thing that was created to serve a purpose in these ways. I'm not conflict. I'm not at war. Even though I see the conflict and I see the struggle and who appears to be the bad guy and who appears to be the victim, and I can form some opinions, it becomes much easier to stop becoming permanently invested in the theater of the world, on the world's, all the world's a stage, in this dream of reality, when you realize all of it is simply there as a way to catch a reflection of yourself. But none of it is really who you are.
And so you've done a lot of work around yourself and kind of settling into that space.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not fun. It sucks so bad.
And how would you say that our modern world is affecting our ability to find that silence?
At what point has anybody ever said, like in any school, on any ad campaign, like when has the news or like a head of state ever come out and like just like encouraged anybody to just relax for a few minutes? Hey man, everything's actually pretty good. I don't know if you know that or not, but if you just wanted to take a few minutes and just watch your own breath go in and out of your body and watch how your body is breathing for you and sustaining your life. Imagine that, right? Like the president of the United States came on and said, hey guys, like we know there's a lot of shit going on, right? But I don't know if you noticed, your power's still on, right? Like things are okay. And I want everybody to sit still and just breathe for a few minutes. Like, why is that not encouraged? And this was like one of the first things when I very first started doing this kind of stuff. I started a TikTok in January of last year, 2023. But like and it was just notes that I recorded for myself while I was driving. And then I would just like post them later. Cause I was like, well, nobody follows me. So no one's going to see this shit. So no one can make fun of me, but it's like a place to put it out there and hopefully find someone to talk to about it. But here's why that stuff why that's not encouraged, why we are not put into a place of peace. It's because peace doesn't sell. It's because people don't want to buy peace. They want to pretend that they don't know. They want to pretend that they're like a victim, or that they have the opportunity to step up and be a hero, or that there's whatever things going on. But if you look at like movies, have you ever seen a movie that doesn't look like there's some conflict or some character arc or some like situation that needs to get resolved? Like, when have you ever said, you know what, I'd rather actually just sit and look at a screensaver of a beach for 2 hours because it's more calming, right? Like, people don't do that because it would be boring. So to everybody that's like, yeah, I wouldn't watch a movie like that, it'd be boring. Well, you are the reason we can't have nice things yet, because like people still need conflict, but because they're unwilling to internalize conflict and face the energy of conflict within themselves, because we're here to master energy. So all the energies that are meant to be mastered internally that people don't look at or don't handle, they get projected outwardly. So when you look at people that you would call an icon or heads of state or whatever, those are projections of a collective shadow, of a collective subconscious, a collective avoidance of responsibility or a certain amount of work or a certain amount of claiming personal power. Since they're not doing it, it gets projected out. In your own personal life, we catch these projections, but on a social level, when things reach like a big icon status, that is an aspect of the collective shadow that's being projected outwardly. So since conflict is an energy that has to eventually get mastered, until people start to internalize it, they're going to perceive it in their external world, and it will start getting closer and closer to them. But the further they are from being able to own it, the bigger it's going to have to get their attention in the external world, right? So they'll see more like turmoil in the world. They'll see more like attacks in other countries, but it's far away. So they can be outraged about it and change their profile picture and virtue signal, but they don't have to actually do anything about it because they're nowhere near ready to get involved, right? They want to get involved by being mad online, and then they go to Starbucks, right? So people that start internalizing it and bringing it closer to themselves, that may look like, oh, well, I'm going to get involved with Doctors Without Borders, right? Like I don't have a way to get involved, but I'm going to send money, or I'm going to join the military, or I'm going to do this, or there's a person at my work who starts a lot of shit, so I'm going to confront them. And then they start bringing conflict closer to them until they can eventually get to the point where like, okay, I have like been involved with that energy enough. I've been willing to embrace it and navigate it to the point where I'm not afraid of it. I know how to handle it. When that energy pops up, I know exactly what to do with it. And as a matter of fact, I'm like, I am now bored of that space. Like if I see it, I'm not even going to go to it. Like it doesn't catch my interest anymore. It doesn't offend me. It doesn't get me triggered. It doesn't make me scared. I'm just literally bored of it and over it. That is effectively what needs to happen with every energy. Like it's not mastered until it stops poking you and triggering you. So some people can spend a long time being tethered to the energy of chasing dopamine hits, right? Like, and that can turn into all forms of addictions, like drugs, alcohol, sex, like the common things, but more subtle things. There's all kinds of like positive ways in which addiction takes shape. And it's people pursuing constant happy hits of chemical reactions in their body. And eventually those receptors run dry and they have no choice but to feel the shit they were running from the whole time anyways. And by that point, it's going to be harder. So the things that get not looked at internally, they get projected outwardly, keep getting bigger and more serious looking until it eventually like rattles you enough to get your attention to force you to have to deal with whatever that energy is.
So our own inability to accept the shadow within ourselves, accept the darkness within ourselves, and our need for that conflict, perpetuates conflict in the outside world.
Yeah, the shadow work chapter in the book, I kind of break it down to the three main parts of shadow work, which is dealing with inner wounding, dealing with what I call your evil twin, the capacity to do what you would consider evil or wrong, and then also perceived limitations. So working through those three. And whenever I work with people on my 6-week course, that's always step one. We start with shadow work because that's the foundation and the ongoing process of allowing yourself to perceive truth as it exists within you, without judging it or avoiding it or being afraid of it or all that kind of stuff. But until we can accept truth within ourselves, then it's going to remain either popping out through our behavior in some way that we don't want it to, or it's going to project out into the world so that it can get our attention in the form of somebody else's actions and behavior.
So I know you're into sociology, and I'm getting my master's degree in sociology.
That's awesome.
So I'm going to ask if beyond working with people one-on-one with integrating their shadow, how might we on a larger scale begin to move the population and people towards an acceptance of this shadow and beginning to end conflict if it were possible?
I suppose you could ask somebody to ask the question, why not do it? What are they afraid of? What could hurt them? And then they'll scoff that off at first and like, that's a dismissive question, but like, no, ask yourself, like, what are you afraid of? Why would you not set aside some time, or why would you not be willing to pause when something pops up that scares you or triggers you or like turns you on, or like why would you not do those things? Is it because you believe so firmly that the best use of your time is to be committed to, how much healthier can I get? How much more money can I make? And then when I make the money, how can I keep from paying taxes on it? And how can I, plan for my retirement? And you can optimize your life right up to the grave, right? Maybe you like do it all perfectly and you live to 119 years old and you're pretty spry right to the last minute. and you've got a huge fat bank account with your will all set up for your family, and you die in your sleep. You lived a perfect life. But what did you do other than like ignore most of what was coming through in your heart, just so that you could play the game as it appears to be in your external world, when deep down everybody knows something's off? When you look at the world, when we look at the system of our society, the way in which things currently operate is off, and it's always off. Society is always a little bit off, right? Like you're not going to see a utopia in the world around you as long as you are attempting to either optimize yourself within the world as it is or change the world to fit your image. Both of those things are a lie. They're an endless side quest. It's going off into a maze that doesn't happen. And that is meant to happen for a little while. That's one of the grade levels of consciousness. But like I say, like you never change the world. It's not the world that changes. People a lot of times have to let go of that, because that's the ego telling them there's a certain thing that has to happen for them to go on, or there's a certain thing they have to do before they're finished. Like, no, your ego made that up a long time ago. You can let that go now. The thing is, it's just like a grade level, right? Like when you finish one grade and you graduate to the next one, the previous grade stays the same. That curriculum remains there for other people that are coming behind, right? So other souls that are on needing to get to that rung on Jacob's ladder, if you will. You don't change that rung. You don't take it off or whatever just because you didn't like it while you were there. So a lot of people aren't even looking at the construct from a consciousness level of the world in which they are existing. Once they start to see it and accept it and stop playing dumb and just existing in the world, right? Do my work, make my money, pay my bills, have some fun when I can. Like once people really get that that's not all there is, then it gets really uncomfortable and spooky, and it becomes like very jarring to start to accept the fact that, okay, well, if reality is not just the way I wanted to think it is, and it's so much bigger or different, like what is it really and who am I? That whole tower moment, that whole dark night of the soul phase can go as fast or long as anybody is willing to embrace it. But a lot of times people cut that short because it gets so uncomfortable that they're like, you know what? Nope. I'm going back to sleep in what I used to be comfortable with, and the way in which I had gotten used to doing things and things felt like they were mostly okay. I'd rather go back to doing that than feeling all of this uncertainty. And then that just prolongs the process because what has begun cannot be stopped.
So given that example, which is an amazing example, by the way, that people have to move through, like even we were just talking about myself moving through having this larger mission and meaning and purpose and moving into a new potentially role or new grade of consciousness of not caring so much and kind of just being more presence, Yeah. So do you think that those lower levels of consciousness have to remain in existence? And are we able to, as a collective, kind of begin to create a new narrative? And what if everyone from a young age were to work on their inner wounding and their evil twin and all these things? Like, is that possible, or do those things have to exist?
Yeah, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. The first one is not so important, but the second one. So when you ask about does everyone have to do it, how do we change? So what if there is no one else? What if there's just you here? You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like, because to some degree, you are always the only person that's having your first person experience, and everybody else cannot be any closer than a really close secondary character in your life, right? So to some degree, we're all kind of alone in that way. Like I'm the only person that's ever going to be able to crawl into the highest awareness of my emotions and thoughts and all that stuff. No matter what I say or do, somebody else can only see me through the filter of themselves, right? Which means they can only see me and themselves. And since most people aren't looking at themselves, they don't see either. They just see an idea that they would like me to present as a prop character in their story. So the desire for everybody else's agreement is one of the harder ones to let go. Like any need whatsoever for somebody else to approve of me or agree with me, or if only the rest of the world could do it the way I think it should be done. That's all ego talk. And that's also blaspheming against the divinity within each other person. I can have no investment in the life path of anybody else. The only way to love somebody is for me to be willing to see and perceive the truth as clearly as I can, and like accept it and embody it, and then let it be willing to be seen by anybody else. But the moment I start getting attached to what someone's going to do with it, when it's going to have an effect on them, what the effect's going to be, that puts me back in ego, and that puts me back into wanting to have a say on the outcome. And especially over somebody else, that's sort of blasphemy, because like you are your own sovereign extension of the divine. It's not for me to reach over into your life or anybody's life or the collective's life or any of that. But then also back to you personally, kind of mentioning how to have an impact and how to have a purpose. A lot of that is stemmed from a slight lack of awareness of self. This has been like a big theme that's been coming up with everybody I've worked with this past week. I haven't been making any like posts because I can't get the words to come out when I'm talking to a blank screen. So I haven't been creating content actively, but this has been such a big theme lately. So the concept of knowing thyself and unconditional love, a quick way you can tell if you're on the mark or not is if God showed up right now and said, hey, from this day forward, you're never going to achieve any more wealth, influence, health, attractiveness, like intelligence, like you are at your peak right now. Would you think, oh shit, that's like, I'm not good. I'm not good enough yet, right? Like I needed to get to this point. If that is what you might think, and for most of my life, that's what I would have thought. Like I'm not good enough. I need to get there. I need to do this. I need to prove this. I need to know it for myself. Even if it would have been great to hear it from other people, like I don't think I'm good enough until. That's where most of us are at, especially men. Men are very conditioned to be only viewed as valuable as what we produce. And that's very much a what have you done for me lately trap that we are conditioned into. So that is all a lie of the ego. That's all put in place for us to learn, to accept, to claim the sovereignty of ourself as one with God. And once that is claimed, which has been, if you want to say, well, how would I know? Did God tell me that? Yeah, God told you that. That's what is in every religious text. And he told it to you so many times that if the one religious text you grew up around, you didn't like the way it came across, he said the same thing in every other like major religion and philosophy, right? So your oneness with God is the truth of who you are. And if you can accept that, then unconditional love, meaning, wow, I am truly worthy of love. And have I been actually loving myself? No, I've been telling myself, you can do it. You can get to this point and calling that love, but that's only I'll love myself if and when. That's not the truth. The truth is me and God for all eternity. Before Todd and Cleburn existed and way after they exist, me and God are the same, right? Like we are one. So resting in that is not blasphemy. As a matter of fact, the blasphemy is to deny that and continue putting ourselves at a distance from God, when all the messages of all the highest, longest lasting forms of religion and theology and spirituality are all attempts to allow the reconnection back to yourself and source. So settling into that, I am, and I am worthy. So from that place, why do I need anybody's approval? Why would I have a preference on if somebody gets me or not? That goes out the window. And then from there, it becomes much easier to exist and to let the work of divinity flow through you in the way that it's going to. Now, that might be a work that puts you on a large platform. That might be a work that puts you on a farm in another country, because one of those things really lines up with your destiny, if there's such a thing, and it will line you up with what is the highest match of the truth of your soul and what really aligns with the highest form of peace for you. Not what you think you should do, not what you think society expects, not what you think will get you the best possible results and feedback, but what is actually the truth and what vibrates with the highest, most peaceful and radiant, abundant, like all the good stuff that we think we want. That starts to fall in line by default when we can settle into knowing I am one with God, and I am worthy of love, not as the world defines it, not as like I've come to realize success based on modern American definitions, but just I am one with God. And then from there, watch how life does its thing automatically.
Wow. And so my curiosity stems around, and this is something that I'm very loose with at this point, but it's been around like creating a curriculum, that would be beneficial. So something like creating what you're teaching and blowing it up and teaching it to more people,
Yeah.
So, but the way that you're describing it, potentially, maybe you can correct me, but it's like, instead of you can't reach out to people and put your teachings on them.
Yeah.
You are waiting for them to come to you at the right time.
Pretty much.
Is that correct?
Yeah. And again, so like you mentioned earlier, I have a big like sales and marketing background, right? Like I had gotten really good at that, and calling in a fantastic income and, collaborative partners and investors and selling and, closing the deals and all that kind of shit. So I myself have to be very careful to not let any of that attach itself to the way I show up now. I'm not here to build a business around spirituality. I'm not going to go because that would be the smart thing to do and it would make perfect sense. I could go establish myself as a church. So then I'm tax free. I could start marketing. I could set up a consistent schedule of how to brand and how to market and how to pump out content and how to look at what gets the right feedback and this and that. And then what have I done? I've begun compromising myself and adjusting myself to the feedback I get, which is really kind of fake, because when you look at who is achieving the results I thought I wanted, what is the pattern? Who achieves success and who doesn't? Is it only the most upright and authentic people? Well, the Hawk Tuah girl was a national phenomenon a couple of weeks ago, right? Because some girl out drinking was just goofing around and made like a silly joke, like any of us do at any time. And it just so happened, right? Like the it just so happened part is the part where we've got to stop and pay more attention. Like what defines the person who has 2 million followers and the person who has like 200? And like to some degree, there is no difference in them, right? Like their intelligence, their appearance, the value of their content is the same. So what happens? Your outcomes are always really out of your control. And the moment we start getting really fixated on it, and this is for a time, right? Like I also have a very strong goal setting background, right? That got me out of a very uncomfortable childhood and a very unpleasant sense of vulnerability and powerlessness and all that kind of stuff. That's like the third part of the shadow work that I mentioned. If somebody's operating from a space of feeling like not good enough or a sense of lack or whatever, well, then that is your work. You're going to have to start setting goals and start activating yourself and start moving yourself in a direction that makes you feel more empowered and all that kind of stuff. If you've seen the post I made recently about kind of the 3 primary stages of ascension, in stage 1, you can't ascend. In stage 2, you won't ascend. And then the responsibilities of stage 3. But in stage 1, nobody's coming to fix it for you. You got to do it yourself. This is like real world nitty gritty goal setting, application, discipline. This is like that masculine energy that moves you along into creating like stability in your life. And then from this place, people tend to not ascend because now they've gotten very comfortable. They've gotten very used to how things kind of work. And at this level of the game, they'd rather stay here where, there's some duality and there's some disappointments, but there's also a lot of like, I'm used to it. But what people don't get is like evolution doesn't stop. And at a certain point, once you let go and continue moving, you don't look back, right? Like at no point are any of us having a conversation to reminisce about how much we used to enjoy shitting in a diaper versus in the toilet. right? Like, well, now I wouldn't, like, it's a no brainer, right? Most of the way we are living as adults is really able to be transcended as soon as we'll just actually do it. But we have to do it ourselves. There's not going to be a parent that comes in and does it, right? Like, there's not going to be a moment where you're validated and told you're worthy by some exterior deity, because that's already happened anyways. The moment exists where that happens when we claim it within ourselves, when we receive it within ourselves, and when we like are bold enough and humble enough to just accept that that's the way it is, without feeling like we have to go do it or make it happen or discover it some kind of way.
So I have a feeling you know who Manly P. Hall is,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, and the occult, I love the way you talk about the occult. There's nothing hidden. So that makes me curious though. Like you talked about how, you could go get a church and you could do all these things. And that's kind of what Manly P. Hall did. And so it makes me curious about what you think about the way that he went about things, and his ability to share all of those teachings on such a large scale. Like, is that something that was his mission, or is it something that like you could see a need in the world for more people doing that?
It had to have been both for it to have come to pass, right? Like, it had to have been his mission for him to decide to do it and for it to be allowed to happen. Because for every person that we see that we would consider a success, right, that reached a pinnacle of their field, how many other people had that same aim and ambition and it didn't happen, right? Because maybe their journey wanted them to start in that direction, but find something else along the way, or they were aimed in a direction that wasn't meant for them at all. So all they found was pain and disappointment and loss, right? And can they accept that they were pointed in the wrong direction and allow a recourse, or are they going to remain stubborn and stuck to the ego and the expectation of the outcome? Well, I wanted to do this and I wanted it to end up this way, so that's how it's got to be. So is it possible that Manly P. Hall was just the guy that on his own just thought up an idea and decided to create a big brand around what he wanted to do? Possible. But he also, like I said, when someone reaches an icon status, they are a manifestation of the collective subconscious. So plenty of people who are hungry for spiritual teachings in a way that is a little bit broader than the confines from which they were raised, that produces these people who speak at a larger level. But in order for somebody to exist at a larger level, they're still in connection with a large platform of people who want to hear it, but they need to hear it from somebody outside of themselves, and they're still fragmented. So the person who's doing it is also fragmented in the sense that they're an embodiment of that duality system where, yes, they're setting themselves up within the current status quo of how that system works. I'm establishing a tax bracket for myself. I'm establishing a brand and a business and an LLC, and we're doing things this way. And I'm creating a platform for myself so that I can make a bunch of money. And also it's great that I like share information, but since this is my business, even if I don't have anything profound coming through, I have to produce something. So, every week I got to come up with something to say. I got to come up with something that these guys will buy, right? Like, so it's still an extension of that construct, but it's not without benefit, and it's not without purpose. Like, all things can be your teacher, but no one thing has to be anybody's teacher, right? If there was any one thing that was specific and that it was a requirement, then by default, it would exclude so many people who couldn't have had access to it, right? Because they were in a different time or a different place in the world, and whatever that one thing was, they couldn't get it. So that would, by default, cut a lot of people out. But anything can be the teacher that eventually points people back home to themselves.
So then that leads me to the question of, like, let's say that you did have a dream or a desire, or maybe you thought it was your destiny to become someone like Manly P. Hall, to be a speaker, to have a brand, all these things.
Yeah.
How would you know or feel confident, I guess, in the fact that destiny led you in a different direction as opposed to the fact that you got out of alignment maybe and you were supposed to, but you're failing. And so, because I've battled that myself, where it's like there's 100,000, 100 million people in the world that have a dream just like me to, to write a book and to, public speak and do all these different things. And so many of them have not achieved that, know? And so who am I to achieve this thing when they couldn't? What makes me different? Am I supposed to? Am I supposed to settle and just be a dad and just hang out with my kids and do whatever,
Is that settling? That's another one. Is that settling? Like, did you establish those ideas because it just resonated very peacefully with something you could enjoyably do and there was no question about it? Or was it coming from a place that was desiring to have a sense of identity? Like, I could create a persona for myself around these actions and around these achievements if I move in that direction. Is it settling? If you're just, I mentioned to a friend the other day that I was going to, this year, I'm going to homeschool my 2 younger kids. And they're like, does that leave you any time to have a life for yourself? And I was like, wouldn't it be crazy if my kids were my life, right? Like how much do I have to remain socially relevant and active in order to fulfill my soul? Like, cause all of that stuff stems from, well, I got to make money. It would be, like if your mating instincts kick in, I need to find a partner, right? Like, all these things kick in. So is it settling? Is it giving up? That is a big success indicator, right? Like, I mean, that's a Donald Trump quote, right? Like one of the biggest challenges in life is knowing when to persist and when to give up. Because anybody who has achieved noteworthy success in their life will also be the first one to tell you they have failed way more than they've succeeded. So that is for each and every person to navigate for themselves, because that's part of their journey. So just a heads up, whatever goals we set, you can set 100 goals and maybe 10 of them will happen pretty close to the way you thought. But a lot of times we don't hit our mark, and that's okay if you're okay with who you are anyways. It's really discouraging when a lot of our identity and our self-worth was tied up in waiting to find out if we are worthy of this goal. And then we miss it and we think, oh man, I suck. It's heartbreaking. It is heartbreaking to devote yourself to something and not get it. But that's still the silver lining of that cloud, is just to remind you that, hey dude, you weren't that thing anyways. Even if you would have hit that goal, like in 100 years time, that goal will cease to exist in the world. You remain, you are an eternal spiritual being. So, I mean, you could think of any number of people that, like, start thinking of icons that you know of, and there are so many more that if you dug into a history book or a sociology book or really looked at it, there's so many incredible people that have done incredible things, and that's fantastic. But the desire to know yourself through achievement is only meant to serve a purpose for a while. It's not meant to be the highest form of self-identity and self-expression.
Yeah. Dude, that's been such a big challenge for me in my own personal life is, feeling like I could fast track myself and I could just devote myself to work and I could just, improve our lifestyles and we could vacation more and we'd have more and I'd be, able to provide for the kids better. Yeah. Or I could just be more present and not care so much about self-improvement and career advancement and all those things. And so trying to find a balance between that has been a constant struggle for me.
It's hard with kids too, right? Because and as a man, right, it's fun for us. That is a beautiful part of our DNA, right? Like in us working on a 24-hour cycle versus women that have a monthly cycle, and our chemistry tends to line up more with the sun and there's more with the moon. So each and every day, right, for the most part, we're up and ready to go and ready to get something done today. And coupled with that, society has conditioned a man to say, oh, and by the way, since that's what you want to do, you're only as valuable as what you can do and what you can produce. And there's this competitive hierarchy system. And that's not a terrible thing, right? That's not a bad thing. It's only meant to be for a while. One sperm gets to go in the egg, all the rest of them get recycled back in the body, right? Like life doesn't end at any one point, but it continues evolving, and not always in the way in which we expected it, but it doesn't stop. It's not the end of the world. But where you attach your sense of self, your sense of worth, your identity, it eventually, if you let it happen, will get anchored into your oneness with God and that eternal, untouchable place. And then after that, everything else you do in the world is like you and God building a sandcastle on the beach. It's really fun, and you can make a really amazing sandcastle, right? If you want, and if it works out, and if you have enough time before the sun goes down and the tide comes up, right? Like, but it's just that. It's just for play and for fun and for experience and for having access to so many different fractals of energy, of emotion, and tools through which to learn and play and experience. But the moment we start taking it so serious and really attaching our sense of self and our identity to this avatar and through this performance that we put up that's based on how it affects the world and what the world thinks of it and the response we get from the world, at that point, we have now abandoned ourselves. We have now like taken our crown off and put it on someone else so we could see what a crown looks like.
So what would you say to the dad who has been chasing a goal and is like, oh, once I'm finished with this goal, then I'll be more available, then I'll be more present, then I'll be, and it shifts into another goal and it shifts into another goal. Yeah. And at some point along the line, they realize that maybe I'm not going to be there for my kids at all. And I think that I've witnessed that a lot in my own life as well as other people's lives where they're waiting to be available for their family. They're waiting to be available for other people. They're waiting to work on themselves at some point in time.
How many kids do you have?
Once they accomplish something. I have 2.
How old are they?
9 and 15.
Yeah. Okay. So is the 15 a boy or a girl?
Girl.
Okay. So it's the trouble has started slightly. I don't mean trouble.
Not really. I mean, she's a great kid, honestly.
Cool.
Yeah. And I was going to ask you about that too, with your own like parenting styles, is like how you can keep them away from the comparison lifestyle and the social media and the need for chasing external validation. Yeah. I think we've done a lot of talking and a lot of working and a lot of reading together to kind of help her to establish a strong sense of identity where she doesn't need that so much, because I can't save her from it, but I can strengthen her resolve through it.
Yeah. The thing you're asking about being present and how to balance, like when to devote your attention towards production and towards being of value in other places in the world, right? That's certainly not wrong. Your desire to possibly know yourself and expand yourself through these works, that's also a beautiful thing. How to be present when and where you're at home becomes tricky. So again, I've got 5 kids. My 2 older kids are girls. They're grown and they live on their own. Our relationship's fantastic. Our group family chat is ridiculous. It's a total HR liability if anybody ever caught wind of the jokes we make and stuff like that. But yeah, we're all tight. We have been tight because it's just been us for so long. But after having my oldest daughter, and then shortly after that, her sister, outgrow me and start their own life, and realizing, like, even though I've always known that this day would come, like, how much time did I actually waste with my head up my ass, worried about all the ways in which I thought I was only good enough if I was somehow creating this like picture perfect life for them. Right. And even when I was getting pretty close to doing that, how much time did I spend giving the best parts of my day and my time and energy to the marketplace, to the world for money, so I could then hopefully, enjoy my time with my kids better. And this just came through the other day with a gentleman that I'm working with. And he was just talking about how for the first time he was hanging out with his father-in-law and grandpa, and they were on a porch out on their land. And he was like, we were just having the best conversation. And I didn't even realize like that there was like my work, or the things that normally he's like always thinking about and kind of phoning it in with the people he's actually with. He's like, I was totally there and we were having a great time. We were laughing. And I was like, that's kind of the point. Like, prior to being able to be present, like, ask yourself, how much money do you think it would take for you to afford to be the person you want to be? right? To do the things we say we want to do, right? Like if I could just achieve this, then I could afford to relax more. That's a construct we're making up for ourselves that prevents us from relaxing now, from being present now, from whenever your kid's coming in and wants your attention. Like, can we turn off our need to know what's going on in the rest of the world, or our desire to figure out how to come up with the next inspiration to do something, to take us to the next level? When in reality, like, that's still just an aspect of ourselves needing to know ourselves through challenge, through seeing how much we can do, how much we can take on, what our limits are. That's us, especially as men, allowing things or making things harder than they need to be so that we can find out about ourselves and prove ourselves in some way. Or so we don't feel like a bitch if we let things be easy, right? Or if we slow down a little bit. That's what an old man does. That's what a slacker does. That's what all these things that we've decided we don't align with for so long, right? So all of that is still a costume. It's all still the personality. It's ego. It's stuff that we have added onto the I am as a way through which to know ourselves and explore ourselves. And at some point, it's just up to the individual to decide, okay, you know what? I have known myself in this way for this long. I think it's time. I'm ready to know myself in this new way. I'm ready to invite God to continually pull me into alignment and oneness with God, so that may manifest in my life in whichever way God sees fit. And I'm willing to do whatever work flows through me. But any attempt to like really get stubborn about a direction and an outcome, that's still us like not totally aware of who we are and needing to know ourselves through experience, through exploration of experience.
Yeah, dude, that's powerful. So speaking on your daughter, how have you helped them to avoid, I just intuitively feel like you're the kind of dad, knowing the things that you know, speaking the way that you're speaking now, that you have had these conversations with your daughters about not comparing themselves with other people on social media, not getting trapped in the external validation loop and things like that. And so how might you over the past years have been there to support your children as they have been integrated into the world that we both know has its weaknesses, I guess?
Yeah. In any given moment, I do my best to show up and be as present as possible and speak as truthfully as I can with my kids, which has been an evolving process, right? Because I became a dad when I was 21. So my daughters have, I wasn't always where the way I am now. My aim was maybe true, but my ability to see through my own ignorance was not great. But they were my priority. So there was that. And then just being aware, like I've got 5 kids and each one of them has their own unique personality. So not expecting them to be like a replica of what I expect of them or be another version of what I think is ideal, but just noticing that they are their own unique self. They have parts of me in them. They have parts of their mom in them. And since they're around me most, they're going to pick up from the right or wrong that I'm doing. But also everybody reacts to stimulus different, right? So, each kid we would all of us be in one setting and something may happen and each of them is going to perceive it and respond to it in their own way. So it's just a matter of always doing my best to be as available as possible and tell the truth as clearly as I can see it to my kids, and then be there as they are growing into themselves, and hopefully being the support or like the safety net that they might need in those moments.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. I became a dad at 21 as well, which is funny to my stepdaughter. So my 15-year-old is my stepdaughter.
Okay.
And so, yeah, just jumped right in there, dealt with my own, things, and have looked back since then and had to do a lot of work and had to apologize for some of the ways that I was in the past.
Yeah.
And things like that. And so moving as a man, part of your work, part of your book, I did read your book, was discovering our own current limitations and our character weaknesses so that we can mature beyond them.
Yeah.
So how would you give advice around that, or give guidance, I suppose, maybe not advice being the right word choice, but to help someone to uncover those limitations that they have and the character weaknesses?
So the only way you can know your limitation is be willing to meet it, right? Like, so, and be willing to go beyond it. So there's a little bit of a risk factor. For men, I think this is super important, right? Like, women navigate a lot of like their own, they tend to navigate different insecurities and self-doubts than men do. And this is all structured around societal expectations, right? And gender norms that are generally in place. With women, it's a lot of like, how do you look? And then there's this giant beauty industry around makeup and plastic surgery and all this, and fashion, right? Like, because women expect to look a certain way, or to be perceived as pretty is such a huge part of the female experience, whether they give a shit about it or not. That is the societal expectation that is drilled into all women's head. And with men, it's what's your social status and what do you provide? What can you do? Like, what do you have? It's status for men. So how to move beyond limitations, or how to outgrow yourself, or how to at least discover your limits, is being willing to have a limit, right? Like, be willing to reach the end of the line, like we mentioned a minute ago, right? Like, if God showed up right now and said, hey, today, right now, this is the best you're ever going to be, right? Like, you're the richest, most attractive, healthiest, strongest, smartest you're ever going to be in this moment. Whatever that moment may be and whatever that moment may look like, be okay with it. Be like, yeah, that's great, because all of that is still just a human experience, and it's an expression of God down here in me and with me and through me to be me. It's like God wanted to be Todd. So God came here and is Todd, having your experience. Like, there's like, if you think about any potential what if that pops into like people's minds at a spiritual level, like, who would I be if? And then pretty soon or later, that situation tends to pop up to let you know, here's who you are. Here's what you would be if. So God's what if I was a man in the year 2024, you know what I mean? Like, in this exact specific circumstances, how would I behave? What would I do? So yeah, moving beyond or discovering your limits really starts with being willing to accept whatever those limits and limitations may be.
It's powerful. And so, speaking on the gender norms as well, which are extremely prevalent in today's society, shifting and moving and transitioning, literally.
See what you did there. That was good.
So, what would you say? I wanted to talk about, obviously, integrating the shadow, integrating, the good and the bad, if you will, even though they're all just polarities. But then each man and each woman needs to integrate a masculine and a feminine. And so I would love if you would kind of talk about that, because I see a inability to do that potentially showing up as these gender confusion issues.
Right.
There's obviously a lot more that goes into that, but that's what I personally perceive in my own world. We're having issues. Men are having issues integrating the feminine. Women are having issues integrating the masculine. And the whole definition and boxes around those have gotten so convoluted that now we're shifting between them back and forth.
Yeah, there are two reasons why they're shifting, and you touched on one of them in the beginning. But last night a friend asked me, they're like, hey, what's your thoughts on the Trinity? And I was like, the Trinity is source, masculine, feminine. That original triangle of the original creator source from a pure state of allness, which is androgynous as well. The original separation was from awareness of consciousness into a masculine and feminine, and then into form. But that original trinity of God, man and woman, or source, masculine, feminine, all that stuff, that reverberates through every plane. That is the eternal unfolding. And we are at a point in consciousness where much of what you perceive of the collective, much of what I perceive, we are operating in a space where the types of people that hear these conversations, that are having these conversations, are on that return trip home, where everything was a cascade of separation. And now everything is rejoining back to union. That is a move back into first inner union, right? Which feels a little androgynous, right? Like the internalizing and development and union of masculine and feminine internally. Now, at a societal level, getting to a point where we're not just operating out of survival anymore, right? Like most gender roles were a function of survival, right? Society needed the men to be the first responders. They needed them on the wall. They needed them to go conquer the neighbors and take their goods, right? Like the society needed men to do certain things because they physically could do it. And women were better suited for certain physical roles. And now our world operates, our survival, our livelihood, our ability to keep ourselves fed is not as in the soil as it used to be, right? Like we don't have to be as hands-on for our society to function and thrive. So gender roles, ever since World War II, have begun shifting because things don't have to happen the way they have for all of human history up until recently. So by nature, at a societal level, the function of our gender roles is able to be redefined. And while that's happening, much of the collective is also re-entering union into source. And along that way, it's union of self, which feels androgynous. And then there's people that aren't sure what's going on or how that shows up in the world as a perversion of the truth of what's happening, and how that gets confusing for kids who are going through puberty, who are already struggling with identity and place in society, when society is in the middle of trying to redefine all of its roles and expectations. Like roles and expectations and borders and boundaries are sometimes a good thing for like the formless, for the young, right? Like a child that has a barricade between themselves and the wall socket is less likely to stick something in the wall socket and shock themselves to death, right? So removing all borders and boundaries is for the higher initiates, it's better. For people that are still newer or still unclear on who they are and how everything works and what's going on, and they're still trying to just get the earliest sense of identity, and society's like, maybe your gender is like totally up for negotiation. Maybe we can like hack up some of your body parts and pretend that like your chromosomes are now different. It's an unaware reflection of the collective shifting back into higher alignment with God, with source, which again comes with a nature of androgyny that not everybody is able to perceive the truth of what that means and how that's actually taking place within us.
Yeah, no, I can see that and I agree with that. And so how would you say that us as men are moving towards this more androgynous nature and beginning to bring in the feminine into our experience? And how does that benefit us, or how might that be even a challenge for us? What might we need to do?
Yeah. So generally the four like main pillars are masculine energies tend to be physicality, intellect, and the feminine energies tend to be spirituality, emotion. Now, each person should be able to own and embody all four of those equally, which props up creation. The creative energy comes from the union of masculine and feminine, right? Like that truth echoes in so many ways through so many expressions. But physicality, intellect is masculine. Emotional spirituality is feminine. When those are equally yoked and in union, that forms creation. More men, through their intellect and through their physicality, are starting to be okay embracing emotionality and spirituality in a way that did not fit within the previous like rigid structure. The rigid, like strictly like fragmented and somewhat wounded masculine would take spirituality and turn it into religion, right? Like that was the intellectual way to do spirituality, turn it into religion. Here's how we're going to do things this way. And by the way, if you don't do it this way, we're just going to burn you at the stake because you're the devil, right? Like, or we're going to go to war with you and we're going to have like the crusades, right? So that's like a wounded masculine way of looking at it. But as society has gotten to a place where things are safer and more comfortable and more easy, and we don't have to physically go like get into life or death situations over any sort of disagreement or all that kind of stuff, we can have more space and more conversation. And society is moving into a place where they allow men to start to feel things, start to express emotions in a way where everybody's not going to like look at you and be like, yep, he's broken, or he's a bitch, or he's useless, right? Like, you know what I mean? Because we don't need to depend on the emotionless, cold guy to go do it. Like, society has enough space that is allowing men to begin to feel. And part of the reason men can feel is because so many women have decided they want to take on the masculine role, right? They want to be the breadwinner. They want to be in the marketplace. Most women are kind of like realizing that's a drag, and they're like unhappy about how society has got to that point. But they may not realize they are affording the collective a space for men to begin to feel and heal and integrate their own inner feminine nature. So they've effectively taken some of the weight off of the shoulders of men. Now, given it's a weight that men are built to carry, they're carrying the masculine energy, which is heavy, and men are built to carry it better. But it's providing a space for men to develop parts of themselves that, at least from a societal standpoint, hasn't been able to be done, at least not for a long time, not since maybe like the Renaissance.
Dude, I love that. So that's the exact same thing that I've been going through, actually, which is really funny. I never necessarily thought about it in that way, as emotion and spirituality being those feminine characteristics. But my wife, extremely emotional, extremely spiritual, like herbalist, botanist, all that stuff. And for the longest time, I was like bodybuilder, super logical. Like, we would get in arguments because she's coming at it emotionally, I'm coming at it logically. We're not able to find that sweet spot in the middle.
Yeah.
And as time has gone on, I have devoted myself. That's why I got a degree in psychology and started reading all these books. Is like, I want to understand emotions. I want to understand. And so I'm trying to understand it from a logical
That's how
place.
men do it, right? Like, I want to understand.
Yeah.
How can I make sense of these? Like, oh shit, I gotta feel them. Right? Like, exactly. It takes a while for guys to, and then we do that thing too, where like, if you get into an argument with your significant other, and like our identity can get challenged to the point where if we feel the slightest bit questioned, and we're like, wait a minute, I'm doing these things, I'm doing this, I've got a checklist of all the shit I'm doing that says I'm a good guy, I'm meeting all the requirements. What am I missing here? And it's like, bro, just feel it. And it feels not cool for a little bit, because it's the opposite of how we've come to know ourselves as a man and how we've come to tell other men, to be. So it's like, okay, well, either I've been wrong or I've been like, it feels weird. It feels really uncomfortable. It makes you, anyways, sorry.
Yeah, no,
that used to be a big part of what I talked about like a year-ish or so ago, like the sort of dynamic of this whole ability to move into union, both as an individual and in couples and stuff. And it's such a funny, not easy thing to navigate.
Yeah, no, I've been with my wife since I was 21. I'm 33 now, so it's been a constant evolution of us both changing and understanding that, and me being exactly what you said. Hey, I'm checking all these boxes. What do you mean? And then her be like, yeah, but you're not showing, you're not, understanding the feelings. You're not really emoting in that way. And I can honestly admit that I've come to the point of crying so many times from like just allowing myself to feel, and it being so overwhelming because I haven't allowed it at all, that it's just like, what is happening? I don't like this at all. And it's just very uncomfortable. And so, it's been very challenging to allow that into my life, so I'm very curious with you, even embodying some of these feminine characteristics of emotion and spirituality, coming from the extremely masculine background of Marines and MMA. How has that been a challenge for you to be out in the marketplace or be in public and be the person that you are? Because I bet you, like, even now, it's like when we start this conversation, if I describe you as like, oh, he's this guy who is a Marine and MMA fighter, they wouldn't expect us to have this type of conversation.
First of all, thank you for the work you're doing and your willingness to continue not remaining fixed, right? Like, your ability to evolve and your ability to continue becoming one with your wife is amazing. I mean, that's the whole point of what it's like, literally become the same person, right? Like blend into each other, not who y'all were before, but becoming one is fantastic. So just want to like give you some praise for being willing to do that. As far as how I got to being the way I am now, I really think as a small child, I definitely loved to play rough. I was definitely a little evil Knievel on my like dirt bikes and stuff, and
Nice.
always getting roughed up. But in general, I think this was more of how I was in a particularly in my household and the area I grew up and stuff, where everybody was just like, you got to be tough. And if you were perceived as weak, you were getting beat up and stuff. You know what I mean? Like the bullying was still a thing, and getting your ass handed to you was still a thing in elementary school, right? Like, so life made me become aware that I needed to figure out, like, I'm in a male body, right? I'm a man. How do I be a man? What does that mean? How do I become a man? So exploring that and being raised in this atmosphere, which was always like forcing me to have to get comfortable, like understand conflict, right? So that led to a lot of the stuff I've done. I needed to explore myself and my limits and my inner cowardice or my inner opposition to these spaces. Like I was like, I might as well just embrace it. So I was leaning into that. And then it became easier when I was like, okay, the stuff that I've always really wondered about and wanted to talk about, and the ways in which I've always really wanted to express myself, even if it looks a little like, at this point, nobody's going to tell me to my face that they think I'm a bitch for it, or nobody's going to, you know what I mean? Like they could try, but that won't go well.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, so at this point, I'm an established tough guy. Nobody's going to question that. I've done all these things. I've checked all these boxes. I've done more of the like hard man shit than most men. So I have now earned the right to be able to try to like also figure out who am I really. So that has allowed me to, I guess, be more authentic, which is my truest nature, which was always, I've had a huge like sensitive side and all that kind of stuff. And spirituality was always my top priority from my earliest memories, right? Like, how did we get here? Who is God? Why are we not just in heaven right now? Why did God make the devil? You know what I mean? Like, if there's such thing as a heaven and hell, well, all these things, this was the questions I needed answers to when I was like 4 years old. So yeah, all the stuff I've done was ways in which I needed to prove myself to myself, needed to explore myself, needed to be willing to confront the parts of myself that I would, maybe would have rather not had to deal with, but didn't have a choice. Until ultimately getting to a point where I was like, okay, why do I need to do this anymore? I guess I don't. Yeah.
Okay. Congratulations on that, by the way, then as well, because there's dudes who stay hard forever. You know what I mean? Right. Like they would never back down from being that identity of I'm a man's man. Yeah. That's who I am. And I don't need to, read any books. I don't need to feel emotions. I don't need to, search for these deeper questions. I don't care. I'm just here to work, and that's something that not enough people are able to shift out of, Yeah.
I am thankful to any previous generations that remained steadfast in that way to advance the collective, to create the opportunity for me to be here and exist in this way, to discover authenticity in what I perceive as a more limitless way of doing so. Yeah.
That was a beautiful way of saying it. So I did actually write down some of those questions that you said, which is funny. So that's a perfect segue into, yes, like what is our purpose, and what is heaven and hell, and why is there, so much evil in the world, quote unquote, if, I don't like to call it evil, it's all polarity. Yeah. But if, there is a God. And so I'm down for you to start talking about, why does God allow evil in the world? What have you discovered in your
real quick on
insights or reading?
Real quick on purpose. So here's how you can tell if you're in alignment with spirit or if you're in alignment with ego. Ego wants to know what the purpose is first, or predict the purpose. Spirit is always a surprise. You'll find out what your purpose is when you're done. When you exit this life and you're like looking at the painting of your life in the Hall of Eternity and you're doing your life review, then you can see what your purpose was. But as long as you're busy trying to craft a purpose, that's still your ego, which cannot create. It can only recreate and reorganize the information that's been programmed into it up to that point.
So you believe in reincarnation. You believe in or a soul existing in a hall of eternity for beyond our life, which I do too. So, I mean, I'm just curious about that because I was having a conversation with a guy the other day who was having a lot of trouble. He used to be a minister. He was having a lot of trouble accepting the fact that heaven and hell are a thing.
Yeah.
And that someone who's a good person, like this is the example I usually use, but someone who's like an Aborigine who has never heard the story of religion, has never, heard of, okay, God, they obviously, as you said earlier, they have some sort of sense of spirituality, but they haven't been told the story of God and they haven't been told the story of Jesus, but they lived an upright life and they took care of their family and had honor and integrity and all these things. Like, would they, as a non-believer, go to hell? Like, I don't believe that, And so what do you believe about moving on from this life and what that means?
From your perspective, all of those things are just textures in the background of your story through which to conceptualize. But you are not the Aborigine, right? Like, you are not the person who was born in the year 300 BC in Egypt, who was who was trying to pursue alignment with Ma'at. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's kind of why I was saying all things can be your teacher. No thing must be your teacher. Because if all came from original source, then we are all part of source always, right? So would God create a system where it was going to have an expression of itself that it was then going to like cut off so that portion of itself could go experience an eternal damnation? Because while it was forgetting who it was, it didn't do what it wanted to. So it's like, okay, well, that part of myself is cast out. So that sort of concept is still somebody moving from a place that isn't even aware of who they are yet. They still aren't aware of their connection to the divine. They still perceive themselves as just this being that just popped up all of a sudden. So the idea that like you're a new thing and you're going to become self-aware, at some point between puberty and age 30, you're going to start really like becoming aware of yourself. And if you live that long, and if all the stars align just right, then, by the time you kick the bucket, you're going to get to go to heaven, or more than likely, all those things aren't going to add up just right, and you're going to hell. Yeah, that's an impossible scenario that when somebody really sits with it, and if they dissect the Bible and actually read and study the entire thing themselves and get into the etymology of it and the historical settings of those stories and all that kind of stuff, and really look at the words of Jesus and how clearly he illustrates that everybody eventually goes back into oneness with God. But they don't tell you that on day one, because that sounds like a permission slip to go get away with whatever you want a little bit. But as far as what happens when we leave this life, how did you come into this life?
I don't know. I mean, there's lots of different beliefs on that. And my own belief, is that from some sort of spiritual world, that my soul already existed. I don't know how long. I don't know the difference between like a new soul and an old soul.
Yeah.
But I think that for sure that there's a spiritual world, for sure that I have a soul that existed before this life and will continue to exist after this life. I don't know if it's going to go back into another body. I don't know if it's going to go back into an animal. I don't know if it's just going to stay in the spiritual world. I don't know if it's going to ascend and become an ascended master. I mean, I have a hard time believing that one, but
yeah. So
we just keep working. Yeah.
From the original space of source that then became all that is. And from that original place to here, and this is also in the Bible where Jacob had a dream, the story of Jacob's ladder, where he saw a ladder and angels were coming up and down continuously, which is that things transferring from the original source to the basis crystallized material world. There's a constant influx of data, of information, of consciousness, of beings, of angels, whatever you want to call it, going back and forth. So when you remove yourself from time, let me say this another way first. So a lot of people think, I'm me, I'm all I'm ever going to be. I've got this life. When it's over, I'll be in a next life. And in that life, I'll be there with a lot of other people that were in the previous life on earth. So that's just like thinking you're going to do the same thing again, right? Like, I'm just going to be me, but in another world, and I'm going to get to know people and have a longer lifespan, eternal, right? I'm still going to be me, still going to get to know people, but I'm living in a different place, kind of. It's like a really limited idea, and it's a very doesn't leave room for the inevitability of transformation of self, because before you were you and your body with your many parts and many trillions of cells, you were a sperm and an egg, right? In two different bodies that eventually became one thing, that eventually grew into a whole body, that reached the end of its growth cycle and then was born into the new life. And from the womb, when your head starts poking through, we call that crowning. And then when you're in this world, which the word matrix comes from the Bible in the Old Testament. And when they said matrix, they meant a womb. So this world is a womb where we will be born again, according to Jesus. And in Eastern traditions, whenever you have ascended your chakras and you start to reach enlightenment and your crown chakra opens, whereas we were once born by crowning and coming into this world, unaware of how that happened. And we become born again once our crowns open. So there is this eternal unfolding that is in place. And you don't necessarily need to perceive all the phases of transition, because that's kind of like there is no death. Death is the name we've given to the moment where life changes shape. But your level of consciousness cannot perceive the experience you're here to perceive, in this case, to be a human named Todd existing in this setting. You can't actually have that experience if you are also looking through every other set of eyes that is available to you. So the way I mentioned in the book, the way I talk about reincarnation is effectively that after you leave and funnel your consciousness life cycles back up into oneness with God, and you are looking through the eyes of eternity over all that ever is, was, will be, could be, all that kind of stuff. You're outside of time. So everything appears as a fixed thing, and everything is a point of focus through which consciousness could go and look through that set of eyes. And in this particular moment, the set of eyes that God is looking through are yours, right? So just like when you go to sleep and dream, in your dream, you interact with people, but that's all in your head. But you wouldn't be able to have an experience if you were aware that you were also those other people. You wrote their script, you're acting it out, right? Like, you can't just have the same conversation with a mirror. Like, you need to just think it's you and that there's something different in order to have the experience. So a lot of that is what life is for God here, needing to exist in a way that feels isolated and autonomous and individualistic, even though that's kind of not the real truth.
So we die, we transition out of life and back into the oneness. Mm-hmm. And then what from there? We stay there?
You could be there kind of now in that I am space till you get bored of it. But when you return to that space of remembrance, of knowing, of feeling indescribable, like safety and contentment, it's really difficult to put into words, that place of just being the all and knowing that the only thing that exists is your conscious awareness of self and every infinite, unlimited potentiality of what could be, which is pure chaos, right? The waters from which God formed, let there be light. And the first thing was just a big blob of a mess that started to have to refine into some sort of order and structure and systems. But as you return back to the one, why did God not stay there in the first place? So I don't think people really spend enough time meditating in this question. If you were God, like if you were like me with my eyes, like you with your eyes closed, there's nothing. Your head has gotten quiet enough where it's just, I am. How long could you stay there before you started to feel lonely, before you started to feel bored? And from that place, what would you make? If you were going to recreate all of creation, what would you make? Would you just make a playground? Would you just make pets? Would you just make slaves? Would you just make things that worship you? At some point, would you want an actual connection with something that isn't equal, that can fully see and know and appreciate you and be on your level in a way that it can like minister to you, to the aspects of yourself that nothing else is able to? How would you create a system that grows other things into being an equal God as you? And how far away from yourself, like how close to original self as source could you get that whole process before it all folds back in on itself as just, I'm one, but I'm also alone? And that would be really uncomfortable for people that haven't done that, but a really good meditation. Like if you were God and you were all that existed, what would you make? And how long would it take before you got bored and lonely? And how would you deal with that? What would you make for yourself?
Yeah, I've definitely heard that before, where we are all God experiencing life through each of our own eyes, because at some point God wanted to experience more than just I am.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in your opinion, do you believe in heaven and hell even as a construct, even as something that exists here in this world?
So in this world, people do exist in their own states of heaven and hell all the time, right? Like you can open social media and see everything from people on vacation having a terrific time and people that are like outraged about any number of things, what our government's doing with our tax dollars, what some country is doing to some other country, what, you know what I mean? Like, and then that's not even hell. That's experiencing problems. Hell is when people are in a place where they feel so unworthy of love. They feel so irredeemable. They feel so ashamed. They have zero faith or confidence in themselves. The closest point that you could, I mean, there's a ton of this, right? Like people that have really gone off the rails and then become aware of it, to where they are so separated from God because they are holding themselves away. They feel like they are unworthy, which is the ultimate hell. Which is hell, right? Like imagine God said, "You're unworthy. You're going to hell." That's what hell is. The furthest removal from God, where there is no salvation. So a lot of people exist in that space already. There are mechanisms through which that pull them up out of that. And it has to happen externally, right? Like there is a system of external things that can shift us, shape us, and ultimately like keep us like the bumpers on the bowling lanes that kind of keep us heading where we're going without getting too far off track. But yeah, heaven and hell as a construct is like physical places that you can imagine from a quantum level. Anything that can get talked about and imagined, kind of exists. But there's a lot of stuff that exists in the ethereal, in the imaginary, as a background idea through which to frame some of these concepts that people need to work through, rather than a place that you physically go and like feel the same way you would feel existing in your body through your five senses.
Yeah. So I'm really curious about substance abuse, and I know that this to me ties in through the aspect of creating your own hell and living in your own hell and feeling unworthy, but also substances being something that can help pull someone out, whether that's mushrooms, whether that's marijuana, whatever it is. And so I'm curious what you think about substance abuse and the potential proper usage of medicine or drugs as a tool, and our ability to cope without them as well.
Yeah. What do you go to first? That is your God. Have we made a false God or a false idol out of something that was a misaligned form of recreation, or it was a tool or a guide or a helper that allowed us to, Ram Dass, right, said LSD and psychedelics, all they do is that they can put you in the room with Christ for a few hours. He was basically saying people that find God through psychedelics or through these like plant medicine journeys, right? Like maybe they thin the veil enough that you can experience what it's like to be in that space that is hard to conceptualize and see through the limited senses, the five physical senses. But then what happens is after people have that experience, maybe they touched divinity and they felt spirituality in a way they hadn't before. So they attribute that with the drug they took or the thing they took or the whatever. So now they have made a false God out of this thing. So when they are in the low of just being a person and they're in a hurry to experience divinity, rather than like pursue oneness with God and be open to God revealing itself to them on the divine schedule, they instead say, my ego says, well, I want to feel that again and I want it right now. So I'm going to go serve this God. I'm going to go here first. So that's a common misalignment. And that's why I'm like really hesitant against people that get super into the concept of like whatever drug medicine pathways to God, right? It can very quickly become a false idol. Everything else, like the chapter in the book Addictions, and this is one of the calls on my kind of 6-week thing. I work on people with addictions and attention. So anything that you catch yourself doing obliviously or impulsively or on autopilot is an addiction, even if it's a good thing. Like literally it could be breathing, right? Like you'd be like, wait a minute, I was just working on this with somebody yesterday, but when you're like, wait a minute, I don't remember the last time I've noticed myself breathing, right? Like maybe I've been taking shallow breaths, which increases the chemical process that creates a sense of anxiety in the body or whatever. So, okay, I have been breathing on autopilot. Now it could be anything, right? Like I caught myself opening Instagram. I caught myself grabbing a coffee. I caught myself doing something that I wasn't even paying attention. And I'm now aware that I'm doing something. Why was I doing it? Most things, if you catch yourself doing something on autopilot, it's an addiction and you should stop it until it shows you why. Like some things may take days or months or, whatever, it goes away forever. You could start with breathing. You could say, okay, I haven't paid attention to my breath in a while, so I'm going to stop right now. I've got 2 minutes to stop breathing before I die. So at least I'm paying attention to it. I'm going to take 3 or 4 intentional deep breaths, oxygenate my body, make sure I'm calmed down, not worried about whatever it was I was paying attention to before. And then after a few good breaths, I'm just going to pause and observe the way my body breathes on its own and the way my body breathes for myself. And now just having put some conscious attention back on that thing that I wasn't even aware I was doing, just that alone brings a significant amount of like peace and focus and automatic realignment. Breath is a super important, powerful, like step one must have thing. So that's like always a good place to begin to recenter, but it can be literally anything else, right? Like I was talking about, if it's a drug, if it's physical affection, if it's whatever somebody's doing on autopilot, that is an addiction. That's a coping mechanism for some other truth that they're not looking at. So it's important to spot an addiction, spot a habit, cut it out a little bit. That's part of why like fasting, and not just the Bible, but in all like other like religion, spiritual practices, all that stuff, why it was such a big deal, right? Like having these set pattern interrupts in your calendar for certain times to just be like, okay, I'm going to just create these pauses. That's the masculine setting up a boundary that says, okay, at this time in this place, all the other stuff we were worried about stops. And the feminine can sit right in here safely and be available to receive or to be a channel, to be a vessel through which divinity can reveal itself. Not because I'm setting up a moment for transaction, not because I'm saying I'm going to do this so that I get this, because we're not, like, the human is not going to like bargain and make demands of the divine, right? Like we can't do that. But the masculine is needed to set some structure so that within the boundaries of that structure, the feminine energies have the freedom and the safety and the protection to be available to connect more deeply with spirit.
Hmm. So how would you say, I know that you believe the religious texts represent an inner journey or an evolution of consciousness. And I know that I personally don't know enough people that believe this. And I love the way that you talk about, the true meaning of the Bible. And so I'm curious, just a summary wise, obviously, you could talk for hours, I feel like, on this, but how would you say that the religious texts represent an inner journey or an evolution of consciousness?
It starts with such an unawareness that most people have an entire opinion about, let's just say, the Bible, since that's kind of the main one we're talking about. Most people have a massive opinion about a set of books that they themselves have not read, because the way in which it was explained or expressed or attempted to be acted out for them by other people that they didn't resonate with, but they haven't actually looked at it themselves. That is the earliest indication of where they're at as a person. How much have they actually looked into themselves, or are they forming massive opinions around massive topics that they actually don't know anything about? That's where we start. I don't fucking know, but I've got a really strong opinion. So we are at odds. Yeah, we are at odds with the world because we don't even see ourselves, nor are we looking at ourselves. We're looking externally, and we're fighting the wind. We're fighting a mirror. But eventually, and this happens so much in the spiritual community, wherever people start, they tend to go beyond the bounds of where they began. And eventually, everybody starts to become drawn to the story, to the energy, to the spirit of Christ. And they want to know what that means, what's the truth of it, what are the ways in which it connects to them. They're no longer concerned about the structure of the church and religion and all that. People end up coming back to wanting to know, what's the deal with this Jesus guy? What's the deal with Christ? Why is our calendar the year 2024 since what? Like all these kinds of things. There's a reason why that is the centerpiece of the reality in which we're currently existing. It's an invitation for people to do the work for themselves, not because of what someone else does, not because of what you think someone else says, but to actually do it yourself.
And so you have a very interesting view on prayer then, and what you actually think prayer means.
Yeah.
And I would love to hear you talk about that for a sec.
Yeah, a lot of times prayer, people are unaware that when they are praying, what they're doing is attempting very low-level witchcraft. They're treating it, like I've said, in one of my videos, I mentioned that they treat it just like blowing out a candle on a birthday cake. All right, like you make a wish, you blow out the candle, and you hope you get it. That's how most people pray. They put their hands together, they close their eyes, they go through the performance of maybe giving some thanks and asking for some things, and then they say the magic words. They say, "In Jesus' name, amen," and then maybe they get it, maybe they don't, whatever. But they're missing the point that prayer is really supposed to be a meditation. It's supposed to be an invitation for God to pull you closer into alignment and oneness with God. And it is a offering of yourself, of willingness to embody and to accept what that connection to God might look like. It's a letting go of your expectations and your requests, right? Like there are plenty of verses that say, offer your requests to God, right? That's great, right? Hey, God, I'm really behind on money right now. I'm pretty stressed. You know what I mean? Like my power's out, whatever the case, right? Like I've got these concerns. My child is very ill and I don't know what to do about it. I have these concerns, but giving it to God ties back to the whole letting go of the expectations thing. Like once it's given over, we can't check back in on it anymore. We've got to just let go of all of that stuff and practice moving back into that stillness of I am. So prayer is really a meditative practice of asking God, of inviting God to continue abiding in us, as well as moving us into oneness with God as source, and letting go of everything outside of that. All the what ifs, all the circumstances, all the life stuff, let that go. Offer your petitions, move into your practicing of manifestations for goals and all that stuff, move into a space as a co-creator, move eventually to the place where Jesus said we could do greater works than him, performing miracles and healing people and all this kind of stuff, adjusting the material world around you instantly. All that stuff's fine and good, but prayer is the stillness of asking to be able to reside in oneness with I am.
And so you also have an interesting view on being disconnected from source, feeling disconnected from source. That is, will you share that with us?
You can't be disconnected from source. It's an impossibility, right? Like if you mathematically break down the extensions from which all parties believe creation came to be, and the ways in which quantum theory for the past over 100 years has been scientifically proving ancient spiritual teachings, that there is no disconnection. But when people perceive a disconnection from source, it's because they had this high moment. They had this place of intense downloads where they were really hit upside the head with this spiritual experience that was so far beyond their human experience. They're like, whoa, this is fantastic. And that's not where they remain. They get as much of a download as can fit. And then, just like a child learning to walk, right? The mom eventually has to let go of the kid's hand so it can wobble and get its balance. So once we get hit with these downloads, we're not going to get any more until everything we have has time to integrate and become part of our new DNA and actually be what we embody, right? So when you get access to divinity, and then it's okay, well, divinity is going to see what you're going to do with it when they're not holding your hand and just plainly showing you, here's the truth. You get it, you see it, totally get it. I love it here. This is fantastic. Good. Now go do something with it. Oh, this sucks. I'm a human again. I guess I should go drink some beer. I guess I should distract myself. I guess, that was awesome. I guess I should go, get addicted. I spend $5,000 and go to Costa Rica and do an ayahuasca journey with a shaman so I can feel that again. Nah, bro, just go to work. Just hang out with your kids. Just embody what you felt. Give it time to saturate into you. And then once it does, and you're open and willing and available for source to come into you and flow through you, it allows it to do it more effortlessly. But this is probably my favorite post I've ever made, and nobody saw it, and it ticks me off. It was my favorite one, but it was the part from The Matrix where Neo's getting his first download, and the guy's like, oh man, he likes it. You want some more? He's like, yeah. So he just sits there all day, cramming his brain with all these downloads. And then Morpheus looks at him and he's like, I know Kung Fu. And then Morpheus is like, show me. And then Neo loses, right? So that's kind of it, right? God's only going to give us as much as we can integrate. And then he's going to say, now show me. And then as that stuff becomes more fluid and more part of who we are, then we can get the next stuff. But we're never disconnected, where we can feel very attached. It feels very great to be in that space of divinity. And then we're going to feel disconnected because we're just wobbling on our new legs until they become a little more balanced under us.
Man. So to me, it seems like this belief, most importantly, whether it's true or not, gives you a strong sense of acceptance with the world and with yourself and with how to live and in peace. You said human at peace, in your bio. Yeah. And so to me, I'm curious, one, how this affects your daily life and your daily living, having established and built this belief, and two, how you might seem to reject wanting others to have that as well. Because of the fact that it's everyone's on their own journey, everyone's experiencing their own thing. And so I really, throughout this conversation, I've gained a big respect for you for that, because I would be like, hey, I've found this great thing. I want to give it to everybody. I want everybody to live the way that I do, and you don't seem to have that same desire. It's this is my own journey and everyone's on their own journey, and that's okay. Yeah. And so how does it show up in your life, and how do you kind of prevent yourself, I suppose, from wanting to put that on other people or give that gift, quote unquote, to other people?
Well, to get from where I was to where I am now was really not fun. And like I mentioned, as you start moving more into alignment with the truth of your soul, everything in your life and world that was a reflection of not truth is going to go away. And that's not a fun process. Like the ways in which we have built an identity for ourselves, like the amount of death you have to go through to be born again, isn't fun. So it's definitely not my job to push that on anybody, because that's step one. As if you want to be born, you're going to die. You were comfortable in a womb. You were breathing a fluid. You were soft, like it was soft. Everything was cushy. And you kind of have to die from there. And your whole world just, I'm really thinking about it, like how jarring and traumatic of an experience birth is, right? Like you have kids, right? You've been at a birth.
Yeah.
I've been at 5. I was able to cut 4 of their cords, right? Like,
Wow.
like try to imagine being in there, like existing, right? Like kids think they respond to music. There's some level of awareness and consciousness going on in there, right? Like they move, they exhibit emotions, they react to the food the mom eats. So they know something about what's going on and they're pretty chill. And then one day they can't, like they have reached the maximum capacity. They can't fit in there anymore. It's time to come out. And that whole process for them to go from breathing fluids and having food go in your belly, and now all of a sudden it's cold in here. People are moving me around. Like they don't know how to breathe, right? Like everything instantly changes and it's jarring. So the process of getting born again takes you right from where you had just gotten good at your best comfort zone, maxed it out. You reached your level of like that phase, and then it all starts over in a new way. So I don't want to have somebody do that on what I think is their best schedule, but what I can do is be very available for whichever phase that people find themselves going through and may feel inclined or aligned to me as a support system through that.
And you feel like it gives you, on top of that, a strong resolution or resilience towards dealing with the suffering that you must experience. You know, there's this book, The Ecstasy, then the Laundry, you know, Jack Kornfield. And so it's like you have this amazing feeling, but then you still have to exist in the normal world, you know? And and so I think that I would assume that having that level of acceptance gives you the world stops
being normal. The world stops being normal. When you really think about the infinite potentiality of all that could be, and you just look at like what is, like of all the things that could be, miraculously, this is what is, right? Like I have gravity. I don't just float around. Like I live in a time and a space where there's a grocery store. Like I can go right down the street and walk in here and they have so many different foods available that I didn't have to go hunt and gather. It's like right here that I can just pick from at my leisure. And I have a few dollars in my pocket. I'll get some of this, right? Like I don't even have to like haggle with anybody, or there's, you know what I mean? Like, all of life like shines with the miracle that it is. Even what was previously the mundane, because what was previously mundane that you felt like you lacked something, back to our conversation about our culture that we live in, where you're constantly in this space of lack and constantly needing to do something or prove something or get something. Well, you're never in a place of satisfaction or fulfillment. You're just in this never ending cycle of wanting something else. Meanwhile, you're missing the miracle of the fact that you exist and everything that's around you exists. Like it is like the impossibility of the way in which energy has turned into atoms has formed into the appearance of reality around you so that you can have it. And we spend so much of our life not even missing it because we think there's some other slight little rearrangement that would please us more. And that may be true sometimes, especially if you're in like a very unsafe or bad situation. And then if you're in a bad situation, that's part of step 1 that forces you to have to activate yourself and start claiming your power. Step 2 is learning how to let go of what you've gotten comfortable with. Step 3 is learning how to let go of where you had been and allow yourself to be available to everybody else that's trying to, it's like 1 or 2 steps on the same path as you are.
Yeah. So how do you, so my biggest respect for you then is like letting go of the feelings of being a victim. And I know that a lot of people, especially men, have that desire to be a victim. And as you start to progress on the spiritual evolution, you start to spiritual ego comes into place for many people. And so it's like, well, I have worked on myself. I've done a lot of things and I've been here as well. And a lot of people haven't. And it's hard to exist in this world with all these people who are sheep, who have not, cared to advance themselves, who don't see the world, who propagate evil and things like that. And you don't see yourself as a victim of those things. And how do you help other people?
If there's something you think you want to let go of, we don't let go of anything. We internalize everything. Whatever you're trying to let go of is something you're still judging or viewing as unattractive or unappealing or unworthy. That's something that you think is worthy of God casting into hell. That's us creating this dichotomy, when in reality, we're supposed to internalize everything with love. So anytime, if there was something that I felt I needed to let go of, actually, I would just embrace it. So if it's victimhood, I would embrace all the ways in which I feel like I'm a victim and practice, like embrace feeling sorry for myself. Like, okay, I am positively going to embrace being a little bitch right now, and watch how much faster like that energy just subsides. And it's like, you know what? All right. You're not a little bitch. You're not a victim. Thanks for giving me a space to be seen. Like the energy of little bitch, right? Like that energy is a thing. It's its own little consciousness. It's been nagging, needing a space to be accepted and loved. And I've been running from it all my life. And I'm finally like, oh, wait, maybe I'm a little bitch. We'll just look at it. Maybe I'm a victim. Maybe I'm poor. Maybe I'm too short, whatever, right? Like whatever inadequacies I had wanted to deal with, whatever. Maybe I'm evil. Maybe I'm the type of guy that if somebody cut me off in traffic and I thought I could get away with it, I would yank them out of their car and like chop their head off in public, right? Like maybe I'm over the top evil. Maybe. Yeah. So how to find meditative safe spaces to give those potentialities that you feel like that idea came from somewhere, popped up in your head for some reason. You know what I mean? Of all the things you don't think about that could be thought about, that popped up. It wanted your attention. So if I just pause, I'm like, okay, that seems pretty bad. What's going on with that energy? Maybe it's true. Why don't I just embrace it? Let's say, hey, love you, energy. Love the idea that you want to like road rage out of your mind, right? Let's just actually play out that for a little bit. And not because I feel like it's bad or I'm indulging in something bad, but like it's a no consequence environment. I'm just going to think this all the way through to the logical end. Given enough time and space and acceptance, all energies relax back into love. And the ones that were bad on the way back to love start to feel deep regret and a remorse and a need to make amends. So all energies fold themselves back into love and unity when given unconditional love and acceptance. So yeah, if there's something I felt like I wanted to let go of, I would start by embracing it.
That's huge. So that's very similar to integrating the shadow as well, is figuring out ways in which, yes, I am I have just as much capability of evil as anyone or anything in the world.
Given the right circumstances, if we, it's easy for us to always pretend. Jordan Peterson did a real good job about that, right? Like pointing out that like we all believe if we were alive in 1936 Germany, right? Like we'd be the one guy that refused, like that picture of the one guy in the crowd, everyone's doing the salute and one guy's not. We all think that would be us, but statistically, no. Like the odds are most people are operating from a place of like follow the crowd.
Man, I have I've always had a pretty immense sense of gratitude for my situation because of thinking about that. Like I could easily be the murderer. I could easily be the cynic, the person who just doesn't give a shit and is just rude to people and just believes that the world is bad, depending on what sort of life circumstances that I went through,
Yeah.
And it's
that
nice
stems
to know
pain.
that I'm not.
All that stems from pain that doesn't have a place to be healed. So hate is wounding unhealed, right? So giving those energies like a meditative space, that's the part of the meditation that's like sitting into the meditation of who would I be if there was no consequence. that's a practice that's meant to move people outside of just the human experience and into the energetic realm of what even is consequence, like unwinding the concept of consequence. And how can I exist in a place, like who would I be now that I'm energetically existing in this place without consequence? What does that make me? But giving those energies that stem from wounding or confusion or lack of knowledge of self that manifest as all these ways, these forms of outrage that need revenge. It's just energies, unmet shadow parts that project outwardly that will get louder and louder to get your attention. And by louder and louder, I mean there's an argument you see at the street, there's a big news article, there's a war, there's something blowing up out of control, right? These things that get bigger and bigger, but it's really just an energy inside you that is needing to be reconciled and reintegrated back into unconditional love. And that can't be done from a place of saying, okay, I'm going to sit here and give you enough attention so you'll shut up and leave me alone. It has to be from a place of, I'm actually going to embrace you because I am, and you are an energetic aspect of the construct that facilitates there even being this world, this experience, this ability to be alive and be a human. You were created as a gift, even when I thought you were evil. And because I thought you were evil, I created a separation from you and me. Whereas if I am like the God and you were the thing I separated, I put you in hell and I created this rage within you. So if I can come and like get you and pull you back into the love within me, this is me speaking to the energy of like supremacy or hate or victimhood or whatever. If I can go find that energy where it exists in the world, and not judge the people doing it or judge the circumstance, but just actually realize I created it by cutting it off from me, right? Like we create hell by removing it from God. So if you could put yourself in that God place and look at any energy and pull it back into you with love and acceptance and reintegrate it into love, not because you want to change it from what it is, but because you want to love it for what it is and allow it a space within you to find peace and rest. All energies, once they get that, they stop wanting to express themselves as rage or fear or revenge or, lust, all these kind of things. They start to settle into a unified field of unconditional love.
So is the method for healing inner wounding along that same lines of acceptance, of understanding, like, okay, if I have an inner wound and perhaps it's because I've been hating or really upset with this person for the way they treated me, and it's this wound that exists. So there is the darkness, there is the shadow, there is all those things that we need to integrate, through that process. But
how could anybody hurt you if you are eternal? You could perceive being hurt as part of an experience to grow through, feeling powerless, feeling like a victim, eventually realizing, wait a minute, how am I still here? And those moments aren't. I must be greater than those moments because those didn't reign supreme and end me. I am here. I am aware of myself. And those moments that still bother me and hurt me, that made me feel like a victim, are they inviting me to remember that I can't be hurt? I remain. Ways in which to realize you are more powerful than you had previously thought and what to do with that. Well, now that I'm powerful, maybe I should go exact some revenge. You know what I mean? Or maybe I should realize, wait a minute, maybe if I'm that powerful and they were acting that way, how weak and hurt and unaware of themselves were they? Because nobody who's actually aware of themselves, nobody who's healed would hurt others, right? So damn, how much of a mess must they have been in? How much must their inner space have been a hell that they couldn't even deal with looking at, that they had to project it out and lay it off on somebody else? So there's a lot of themes and nuance that work with moving through shadow work, which is why I said it's like step one and kind of an ongoing process until people really find a peace with all that they've come to know and judge and fear, and all that stuff.
Yeah, that's incredibly powerful, man. Like dealing with that and understanding that and coming to that place intellectually, but then also understanding that in your book I saw that there was a somatic meditation as well, because there is a feeling of that as well. Of okay, there's an inner wound that I can intellectually tell myself like, hey, that person must have been hurting, and I can accept the fact that I have that same potential within myself to hurt others, and I can embrace that. But also there's a physical feeling in my body where I'm holding on to this energetic blueprint of pain that I need to somehow let go of. Right.
Now watch this. So let's assume in my mind, I'm imagining I'm hurting somebody bad. I'm like doing something terrible, and there's nothing that's going to happen. There's no police that's going to come get me. There's no God that's going to judge me. Like, I am just able to do whatever I want to this person in my mind. Now that I've gotten that out of my system and I'm sitting here looking at the mess I've made, you can think, well, where did all that happen? It happened in my mind. So that energetic space that I actually tangibly, very physically felt as a lived experience, who did I do that to? Because that was in my mind. That was a construct of my imagination that showed up to receive that abuse from me because I needed to get it out of my system. So that aspect of myself that showed up willing to be the victim of me, now I'm like, oh, fuck. You know what I mean? Like, how and why could I hurt myself in this way? That's where the remorse kicks in. That's where the need to reunify with love kicks in, because you realize any separation from love, just like in your mind, you can't be hurting anybody but yourself, right? Like, if we're all connected, if we all came from source, like, how can I hurt anybody that's not also hurting me in some regard? And that was the message of Christ, right? Like, what you do for the least of these, you do for me. Forgive them, not forgive them. They know not what they did. Like, the same kind of message was like, I need what you do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. This is like a real common theme, that like what you do for somebody else is you. You're doing it to yourself. Judge not lest you be judged. That means whatever judgment you're casting out is a judgment you're placing on that internal part of yourself. I hate that person. Well, that's a representation of something that's within me that I'm unwilling to look at. And because I can't look at it, it has to show up outside of me. And if I hate it, it's because it reflects something that is potentially true of me that I'm unwilling to accept and love and integrate. So I need them to be the bad guy, so I can hate outwardly, right? So, that's an important practice that almost nobody really embraces it. But creating that space in your mind to play through any scenario, and then when done, realize that all happened in your mind. So it was you and you, right? So, and how can you exist in a space of potentiality that has no consequence other than what you decide of it, other than how you picture it playing out, like that imagination state. If we came from the spiritual realm and were born into this world, children operate in a different brainwave state until they turn about 8, right? They're really good imagination. They can sit in a room and play with action figures and be totally cool with that and exist in their imagination in that theta brainwave state all the time. When we meditate, we return to that theta brainwave state. So that brainwave state is closer to the ethereal, to the source frame of consciousness, right? So we came from there, we came here, and that's kind of where we operate in the beginning. Then we get in our 3D, I'm doing the world shit. And then we learn, wait a minute, I can tap back into source through that theta brainwave state, which was where I came from and where I go back to. So there's a lot of like overlaps in the imagery of the seed of life, all that kind of stuff. That's one of the ways.
Space. I'm very interested.
Yeah, finding space to meditate into these potentialities and integrate the ability to construct through mentalization and make real in your mind.
Well, and that's where the doorway, if you will, to the subconscious mind is existing. And so it's like, if you're going to try to find the programming, if you're going to try to learn more about yourself, then being able to access that place becomes incredibly important. And so that's why I've been very interested in like hypnosis and self-hypnosis, meditation, and even some of the practices relaxing into things. So like sound healing, for instance, like helping you really get those brainwaves down to that theta place, and then just kind of being open and accepting of whatever comes through in those moments, you know?
And if all things are like an echo or a reflection of a higher truth, right? So if you can move into an existence that's in your mind, it starts to feel very literal to perceive all of this as an experience in the mind of God, right? Like I'm a character, I'm a figure in God's imagination, but it's still real, but it's also a hologram, but it's real. But either way, I don't need to define it that much anymore, because now I'm trying to move the infinite into the limited human construct of my mind. So rather than that, I'm just aware that there's an alignment and there's a flow and a unending desire to be in alignment and oneness with unconditional love. And that is the return home. And that is the only way that affects the reality in which I perceive it, right? That's kind of like Gandhi saying, be the change you wish to see in the world. He didn't say, find the people that are behaving in a way that seems dumb and go conquer them or appeal to them or reason with them. He just said, be the change, right? So
he didn't even say teach them, either. Just
if they people will ask when they're ready to learn, and if they, you know, that's another old phrase, right? Like when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. But you can't teach somebody something that they don't have any interest in learning.
Kabbalion, So, that makes me even almost hesitant to ask you this question, but I will anyway. You know, as a recap, and we'll finish up here.
Okay.
For my audience, people that are quote unquote high performers, people that want to reach their potential, people that want to succeed and do well, but that doesn't just mean physically, that doesn't just mean productivity wise, that also means spiritually, that also means as a father, as a husband, you know, as a spiritual being. And so what are you recommending? So that's why I said I'm hesitant to ask this question, because I know you don't want to put your beliefs in anybody, but you know, where do they begin? If it's like, I'm just really curious to find a balance between this thing. Obviously, I've talked about balance a lot. I think it's something that's very important because we do live in the real world and we do inhabit a spiritual world as well. What do you recommend?
If somebody is struggling with balance, and I'm a Libra, right? So that brings to mind an imagery of scales and an imagery of things being equal. And once they're equal, they stop moving. They're fixed. Nothing is fixed. Balance is harmony, like in a dance. When you see two people in rhythm moving with the sounds, with the music, that is the best thing you can get. Be able to move and remain moving and enjoy it as a rhythm and as a dance, that there's not a fixed point of perfect balance. And even if you get to that point, this seems to be a universal constant. Once everything gets situated the way you thought you wanted, something is going to plop into your something's going to come and shake the plot up. You know what I mean? Like, so just be willing to stop worrying about what tomorrow is going to be. That is a huge spiritual practice. That was a big part of Jesus's teachings. Like, you know, he said, who among you by thought alone can add 1 day to your life or 1 inch to your height? You can't do it. But just like, you know, the birds of the sky don't sow up for the winter, but they're taken care of. And the feathers, the flowers of the field are adorned beautifully. How much more important are you to God than them? So God knows everything you need. So just take care of today. Just try to be more content resting in today. Like, I have an idea for a future. I have an idea for things I want to work on. I'm going to be as present today as I can. I'm going to wait for tomorrow to show up without me trying to anticipate it or create it so much. This turns into another conversation on how to manifest and how to be more intentional. But in general, a starting point to be able to effectively co-create from and with spirit rather than from ego and from lack starts with letting go. It starts with being okay with the harmony of being in constant motion and realizing there's not a fixed destination. There's not a finish line. It also comes with knowing you cannot miss or be late for your destiny, even if you're actively trying to avoid it. That's what the story of Jonah and the whale's about, right? God's like, go to Nineveh. He's like, the place is a shithole. I'm not going to Nineveh. I'm going the other way. And then God sends a fish to scoop him up and drops him off at Nineveh, right? Like life will put you where you have to be, and it will like do so in a very uncomfortable way until you learn to like accept it. And likewise, you can work as hard as you want, and you're not going to get where you're not supposed to go. So peace is the guide, right? Like whatever we think we're being called to do, once it starts feeling like, not that it's just hard work and not that it's a challenge and not that it's something that like causes us to look at ourselves and deal with discomfort, like the process of your union and marriage, right? Like that brings a lot of stuff to the surface so that it can be looked at and like let go of or whatever. But But there's a peace in doing what you're supposed to do. There's a heavy burden in doing what you think you're supposed to do.
That's huge. That was actually absolutely perfect recap. I loved you use great metaphors, by the way. I'm a huge fan of great metaphors and analogies. The Libra scale is awesome. I imagine it like there's this metaphor in the book Psycho-Cybernetics about a bike. Like once you stop pedaling, you fall over.
Yeah.
So it's like,
I like that book,
there's no balance. You just keep moving forward. You know, and you just keep finding a place of acceptance. And you keep trying to find a place of presence in the day-to-day experience.
Yeah.
I love it. So I'm going to give you a chance to tell people again what your book's called, where they can find you on Instagram or any other platforms that you would like to be found on, and also to what kind of people might reach out for your services. I didn't ask you that as well, so you can throw that in there.
They'll know it if I refuse to do like. I mean, I guess I put out content. I'll reference my book and stuff from time to time, but I'm not marketing that, all that kind of stuff. Anybody that wants to find out more about me, I'm sure you'll put my like Linktree link at the bottom of wherever you post this on YouTube, Spotify stuff. They can find me on Instagram or TikTok. I think I'm the only Cleburn Walker on social media, except for my son, Cleburn Walker the Fourth.
Nice.
And then my book is called Ascension, Knowing God in You. It's book 1, Removing the Veil to Source and Activating the Christos Within. That's on Amazon, Audible, Kindle, iTunes, wherever you can find audio or digital or paperback. It's there. But again, it'll be on my Linktree, which is on my social media.
That's perfect. That's perfect, dude. And it's been an absolute pleasure talking with you. You've made me in a positive way feel like I've got a lot of work to do.
Cool, man. I'm glad I made your day easier.
Yeah, absolutely, man. So thank you for coming on the podcast, and thank you everyone for listening. I very much appreciate your time, Cleburn.
My pleasure, brother. I'll talk to you soon.
Hey, take care.